It's the largest, I always say the most massive, but it's the largest tax cut in the history of our country and reform. And I noticed this just came out 2 minutes ago. They handed it to me. AT&T plans to increase U.S. capital spending $1 billion and provide $1,000 special bonus to more than 200,000 U.S. employees, and that's because of what we did. So that's pretty good. $3.2 trillion, just think of it, in tax cuts for American families, including doubling the standard deduction and doubling the child tax credit. One thing very important for the farmers, the great farmers and the great small business owners that were forced to sell their businesses at bargain basement numbers. We have provided, for the most part, estate taxes wiped out so they can keep their farms in the family, and that to me is a very big factor. This is going to mean companies are going to be coming back. You know, I campaigned on the fact that we're not going to lose our companies anymore. They're going to stay, and that means jobs, and it means really the formation of new, young, beautiful, strong companies. The pass-throughs you know all about, and the small businesses are going to be big beneficiaries. We are going to bring at least $4 trillion back into this country, money that was frozen overseas. So it's really, I guess it's very simple when you think you haven't heard this expression, but we are making America great again. You haven't heard that, have you?
The Trump administration just beginning physical testing on the southwest border, the wall prototypes this week. This as brand new numbers prove that the president is making good on a campaign promise to crack down on illegal immigration. Border arrests plunging to a 45-year low as deportation arrests soar to new records.
The U.S. military says ISIS has lost 98% of the territory it once held, half those losses coming since President Trump took office. Critics say the Obama administration micromanaged the war.
The rules of engagement under the Obama administration were onerous. I mean, what are we doing having individual target determination being conducted in the White House, which took, in some cases, weeks and weeks?
Today, the latest American intelligence estimate says less than 1,000 ISIS fighters remain in Iraq and Syria, down from a peak of up to 45,000 just 2 years ago. U.S. officials credit nearly 30,000 U.S.-led coalition airstrikes and regional partners on the ground, killing more than 70,000 jihadists, but a few thousand have returned home. The remaining ISIS strongholds concentrated in a small area along the Syria and Iraq border. ISIS at one point controlled an area the size of Ohio.
What the Trump administration did was allow execution decisions to be made in accordance with the guidance that he provided. We could have accomplished our objectives through the use of overwhelming power in 3 months, not 3 years.
General Deptula says ISIS-held oil supplies were not targeted for 15 months beginning in 2014 for fear of collateral damage, giving the terror group an additional $15 million in revenue.
Candidate Trump promised to get rid of 2 federal regulations for every 1 added. Today, President Trump claimed his deregulation efforts are well ahead of schedule. He says the ratio is really 22-1.
During the campaign, President Trump promised to free American businesses of what he called burdensome, duplicative, and ineffective government regulation. Today, he used a pretty dramatic example to show just how bad the situation has become.
This is what we have now. This is where we were in 1960.
President Trump brought props to the Roosevelt Room today to illustrate just how federal regulations have exploded since 1960.
1, 2, 3.
It was an opportunity to brag on his efforts to cut red tape, dialing back government regulation, saying his administration has eliminated or delayed 1,500 planned regulations, adding that his plans to eliminate 2 regulations for every new one implemented has been successful beyond his wildest imagination.
For every 1 new regulation, we have eliminated 22. 22. That's a big difference. We aimed for 2 for 1, and in 2017, we hit 22 for 1.
Reducing regulation is part of what the White House calls a suite of economy-boosting measures.
It's a bounce back from those hurricanes. And remember, we thought we had a job loss in September. Now it looks like 18,000 jobs created in September, and then a net new jobs of 261,000 in October. That's the strongest job creation in almost a year. So that's a good number. It shows you companies are hiring. We know layoffs are down and companies are hiring. Let me show you the unemployment rate, because this ticked down to 4.1%. That is the lowest, again, since late 2000. This is a strong job market. This is a job market where someone who wants a job and has the skills for a job is getting a job.
The individual mandate on health care, where you had to pay not to have insurance. Okay, think of that one. You pay not to have insurance. The individual mandate has been repealed.
The individual mandate, you argue, is unethical.
It's like selling you swampland. I mean, how can the government force you to buy something that doesn't give you the thing that it claims it's going to get you, the promise, actual health care? What if you can't get a doctor that'll see you? What if you're stuck inside one of those large deductibles? Bronze plan is now averaging $6,000 a year deductible. You never get to the actual policy bill.
People should not have Ferrari-type coverage. Why not?
Well, let me tell you how it will work for people. Everyone out here is going to understand this point. If I say you own a car and you have to have car insurance, would I ever tell you you need a Ferrari-type coverage? No. We'd let everybody have a Toyota type. We'd say if you want to go on the road, you have to have basic Toyota insurance. Everyone understands that a Ferrari should pay more to cover collision. Well, so then why should someone that's healthy and young pay a lot more to cover someone who's been smoking or who's overweight or has a pre-existing condition and has much higher health bills? That may be the government's role. It's not the role of someone who owns a Toyota.
It really is the linchpin of Obamacare, this idea that the government can force you to pay money to a private entity that you don't want to. You don't want their product and you're being forced to buy it. So repealing the individual mandate is a big part of getting rid of Obamacare, but it also coincidentally helps the tax cut to be a little bit bigger because it reduces some of the cost of the government.
The Obamacare mandate is a significant bump for the middle class, and here's why. Bill, you don't know this, but 80% of the people who paid that penalty last year are making under $50,000 a year. So it's significant for them to either pay $1,200 in a penalty or to pay $5,000 premium for a bronze plan. Someone making $40,000 out there, you're stuck in the middle. You can't afford the mandate to pay the penalty, and you can't afford the premium. If we get rid of that tax penalty, I'm going to save somebody that makes $40,000 a year, $1,200 a year. That's a significant amount of money in terms of a tax save.
It has not taken President Donald Trump long to jump into his new role feet first. On this first Monday of his first week in office, the president set about to fulfill some campaign promises that got him elected.
With the stroke of his executive pen, President Donald Trump fulfilled a central campaign promise and killed one of President Obama's signature trade deals, the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Great thing for the American worker, what we just did.
Meeting with union leaders this afternoon, the president defended his actions, insisting TPP was not in America's best interests.
You guys did a great job.
The president also signed two other executive orders, one implementing a hiring freeze on federal workers, the other reinstating the so-called Mexico City policy, prohibiting federal funding of foreign organizations that promote or provide abortions.
You are great people.
Trade and jobs were the prime focus of President Trump's self-declared first day at work, meeting with business leaders in the Roosevelt Room. The president pledged to reduce what he has called business-killing regulations by as much as 75%.
As of today, the United States will cease all implementation of the non-binding Paris Accord and the draconian financial and economic burdens the agreement imposes on our country. I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
The president citing the Green Climate Fund is just one reason why inclusion in the accord is costing the country a vast fortune, but the move drew widespread backlash. Secretary Hillary Clinton called it a historic mistake, and Vice President Biden tweeted this: "We're feeling impacts of climate change. Exiting #Paris Agreement imperils U.S. security and our ability to own the clean energy future." President Obama, who signed the pact in 2015 as an executive order, sidestepped Senate approval, expressed regret in a statement saying, quote, "Even in the absence of American leadership, I'm confident that our states, cities, and businesses will step up and do even more to lead the way and help protect for future generations the one planet that we've got." International leaders assailed the move as a setback for global efforts to combat climate change, and climate scientists decried it and issued dire warnings of greater risk of increased greenhouse gas emissions. But the administration vigorously defended the move, Vice President Mike Pence pointing to unfair burdens.
This is an agreement that puts an enormous burden on American consumers, on the American economy, while allowing countries like India and China to virtually get off scot-free for a decade or more.
President Trump fulfilling a campaign promise to formally recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and move the U.S. Embassy.
Previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise. They failed to deliver. I am delivering.
What the president did today was, one, listen to the will of the American people. They just unanimously voted again 6 months ago, Republicans and Democrats, to do this.
It's obviously an act of not only political bravery, but moral courage to move the embassy, but just to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The absurdity of the U.S. policy suggesting that Jerusalem was not Israel's capital has resulted in idiocies like the fact that my niece, who was born in Jerusalem, it says on her passport Jerusalem, and then it doesn't say which country she's from. Jerusalem is only important to the world because of Judaism. It's important to Christianity because it was first important to Judaism. It's important to Islam because it was first important to Judaism. Jerusalem is mentioned hundreds of times in the Jewish text. Jerusalem is in the Israeli national anthem. The culmination of Jewish history really was in 1967 with the recapture and the unification of Jerusalem under Judaic rule. The freedom of Jerusalem was only assured, by the way, because of that Jewish rule. What President Trump is doing is not just a recognition of reality. It's also an act of political usefulness, because all of the negotiations that have been happening for the last 20 years, for most of my lifetime, all of those negotiations have been preconditioned on stupidity, that Israel is going to give up its eternal capital, which is insane. I mean, in order to understand how dumb that is, you have to think that for Israel, Jerusalem is about 1,000 times more important than Washington, D.C. is to the United States. I mean, the founders put Washington, D.C. on a swamp because they just wanted it to be not part of any state. The reason that Jerusalem is where it is because the Bible says it is where it is. There's a religious adherence to Jerusalem that doesn't exist for normal capitals around the world. And for President Trump to recognize that this isn't going anywhere, that the freedom of Israel is just inherently connected with the freedom of Jerusalem, and that any negotiations that are to take place are going to have to be done by the Israelis themselves, and the Israelis are going to have to make decisions about what to do with their capital. Well, it's a ground shift, and it's a recognition of a reality that's necessary in order for real peace to be achieved in the region.